Firstly, before I start, thanks Rich for organising, and Rami has done an awesome job coordinating everybody nationally. I know Rich is quite hard to coordinate, so so his work's been cut out for him. But thank you very much to the organisers. So I'm Steve Knutson. I am I'll click on the screen here. I am a regional director for Microsoft as of this year. I got made regional director. I'm also a Microsoft MVP for the Office 365 side of things. 12.5 years ago, I co-founded a company called Stratus. I spend my time doing SharePoint things, and two of my team who are much better at this stuff than me are here. And some of the stuff I'm going to talk about today, they did. Thanks, Action Divya. And really, what I wanted to do today, so I'm just going to squeeze that out of the way, is talk to you a little bit about a journey. Sorry, my screen is just not jumping to the next slide. But before we start, I just wanted to share the conclusion of last year's BizApp Summit. You may have remembered that Rich was having trouble with a pen, and during the summit, I had to help the Brighter Days teams out with a good Stratus pen to make sure it worked. A few days later, a parcel arrived in the office with this lovely signed photo from Lee, who's now left Brighter Days, but with a pen attached. And he purposely misspelt my name on there as well, which was just added to it. So that's now currently pride of place in the office. So thank you, Rich, for organising that. I know you were behind it. So what I'm here today to do is to tell you a bit of a story of digital transformation. I'm not going to talk about who the client is because we're kind of still in flight with them, and I hadn't really had an opportunity to have a proper chat to them about what I was going to say. But it also means I can be a little bit more open as to some of the challenges that we had in this project. So this is not necessarily, I think it was put up as a customer success story. It was a success, but the journey getting there is what was really the important part of the journey that I wanted to tell you about. So a little bit about the background of this. This particular project was in a very fast-growing organisation, and when we get right at the end, you'll understand some of the things that were going on and why things played out the way they did. They were expanding across New Zealand into different regions. They needed an interim solution, sort of with a 12 to 18 month life cycle before they implement a proper HRA system, which meant we had a small budget because things that have a limited life. They needed it now. They were already experiencing pains with process. They had lots of, the process itself was actually in the heads of the individuals of the organisation. And in my own company, growing from a small team to a larger team, it becomes really apparent when you start adding people quickly that you've got to get that stuff out of your head and into process. Otherwise, the wheels start falling off quite quickly and your life becomes a bit miserable. So we're trying to sort a lot of those things out as quickly as we could. With an organisation that had very low digital maturity, and we're not office-based. These people were a lot of field-based people. Let me just say one thing about them. They were excellent project managers, just not at their internal projects. Okay, so I would think that they would admit that too. And this was also part of a much bigger program of work that they're implementing over a couple of years, including a whole range of systems from health and safety, finance systems, project management, digital, Microsoft 365, all kinds of things, and retirement of old technology. So specifically today, I'm going to be talking about recruitment, and I thought I'd start with just explaining some of the things, bits of information that we gather and who needs it. So at the very beginning, we have managers that need to understand the costs of the role and what's being approved. What is it that I'm approving? And that could be managers, general managers, up to the CEO. The HR team needed to understand when an employment contract was needed, what needed to be in there, where the medical checks needed to be booked in. And perhaps some of those medical checks were required before hiring a person. The payroll team needed to know details for payroll, so the person gets paid. That's pretty important. Has anybody joined an organisation not being paid on the first day? Good. IT obviously needs to know when to set things up. And has anybody worked on an IT help desk? We've received a request for a new person starting in the organisation after they've started. Yeah, everyone, right? So we wanted to try and solve that problem on the way through as well. Some success there, not perfect, but better. The fleet team needed to know whether they needed to provide a vehicle. So do we need to, do we have an existing vehicle in stock that we're going to reallocate, or are we going to buy a new one because we're growing? That was actually quite a big deal because you can't just go out and buy a ute, right? You can't just go down and get one and have it be available the next day. It's got to be this organisation required for that. The reception needed it for the phone list. The induction coordinator needed to know when new starters were starting because they were running sort of weekly or fortnightly induction programs, and they wanted to coordinate with people. And finally, the general managers and CEO needed to know how many roles were being hired, how much it was costing, and they wanted reporting across it all. So there's a bunch of important stakeholders from across the business. So we started with 4 things. We needed to get what we call request to hire. So that's actually approving the hiring of a person. So before some organisations would say request to advertise a role. So it's advertising the job. That's before we've hired something. Then once we've done our interviews and we've successfully found the person we want to hire, we want to make them an offer. But we need an approval process to approve the offer before it was made. And this was becoming quite important because originally this company was in one physical site and you could just walk down the hallway to the boss and say, I need this, and he'd go, yes, without looking at anything, just say yes. But now they're distributed and hiring managers in different cities and so on, and the paperwork couldn't be physical paper. And onboarding process as well around people. I should add to actually changing people because turns out us humans can't spell. And we do things like we have different spellings of names. And so if you ever hire anyone called Sean, the first question you've got is, how do I spell Sean? Which spelling of Sean is it? And if you get it wrong, it ends up in their user account and on their employment contract and all of those things. It's a bit of a mess to sort out. So we were going from digital to paper, and the digital processes themselves, the processes seem quite obvious. Like all these things seem quite obvious. But paper is really flexible, right? So what's the one thing you can do with paper that you can't do with your laptop screen? Write wherever you want, right? Well, you can, but you can't write outside the lines or whatever. There's no business rules on a piece of paper. There's boxes, but it's up to the individual filling it in to try and actually adhere to what's being asked for. Digital processes, however, can enforce that, and they introduce other problems. All that stuff that used to get written on the edge of the paper because there wasn't a box on the form for, no longer has anywhere to go. So you've got to find something for that. So what we did was we focused on the middle. We were looking for an 80% solution for the first iteration, and then the intent was to improve afterwards. And the reason for that was there were so many variations, it was very difficult to be able to even get people aligned as to what they needed. So fortunately for us, we had a bunch of tools in the toolkit, and much like the talk that Ash and Divya are going to talk about this afternoon, we were limited to what we had in our toolbox. And what an add-on to there was Microsoft Forms as well. So Power Apps, Power Automate, SharePoint, and Microsoft Teams. Outlook, Word, Microsoft Forms, and a few other things as well. But primarily those 4 things. This is not one of their actual forms, but it's kind of a representative form of what things look like when people create a paper form for collecting information. And you'll see on here, it's quite small, but you'll see at the top it's got things like the position title, who the person reports to, what the scale of the pay is, what the functions of that job are, things that we might need for the position. Is it an existing position or a new position that we're filling? Are we replacing someone that's replaced? Are we replacing the person that's leaving? And so therefore they might get the same ute, right? That ute might transfer over. Or is it a new person? We need to get a new one. So all of these questions get asked in this form. And we had to design the form electronically. We had to think about a few things. So with the paper form, guess where it ended up? In a file in the HR manager's office, physical personnel file. When you're collecting it electronically and you're using the tools that we had in the previous slide, we need to think about validating the data, privacy. So what is it we're actually collecting, and do we need to? Because this data is going to end up somewhere. And guess what? People do cool things with Power Automate, like send emails. And in those emails, they put things like, oh, the salary, let's put that into a block and let's send it. Now, who should see that? Not the IT help desk guy that set up the user account, right? Don't need it. So we need to think about what we're doing and how we structure our process. I do want to have a word chat about Microsoft Forms though, because it is quite an important tool, and it does have some benefits, but it's got some big limitations. Obviously, if you are using it, we'd recommend using an Office group with it. We take the data from the Excel spreadsheet and we'd stick it into a SharePoint list because we want to run a process off the back of it. But you can't go back and view the form easily, and you can't update the data easily you can't update the data in the form. It's a fill the form in again scenario. But the question we had to ask ourselves is it good enough for what we need? And the answer was yes, sometimes. So in our scenario, we actually felt this was good enough. And one reason was we had a business analyst who knew nothing about Power Automate and Power Apps, but she could build a Microsoft form. And that was enough to validate to work with the business to validate that we're collecting the right data. Excuse me. So if we think about the first of the processes that we have right at the very beginning, we wanted to advertise a position to be hired. So our process looked roughly like this, and it's linear on purpose because doing loop back and feedback loops is quite difficult. So linear processes are good. So where we started off with was we have a form at the beginning of the process where somebody completes the form. We did this form with as a Power App, and we embedded it into a SharePoint page. And on the SharePoint page, we had all of the instructions on there on how to do it. And we launched this particular form as part of an intranet launch. So it was one of the things that we were highlighting to the business. We had, once that form was filled in, we triggered a workflow, and that workflow went through a 3-stage approval through the line manager, the general manager for that division, and then the CEO for the final sign-off. We then notified HR that a process was happening, and then the role started to advertise. So on that form, we asked questions like, where do we want to advertise this role? On Seek and Trade Me? Do we want to use it, advertising internally on our intranet, which was brand new the day that we launched this form? On our social channels, Facebook's actually quite big. They had quite a big Facebook following, so we want to post the ad out there as well, and so on. So this was our request to hire process. And at the end of this, the output at the end of this is an advertised role, advertised somewhere. So you jump onto Seek and go, oh, that looks like the job for me. I'm going to apply. So apply away. So then CVs start rolling in. And outside of our process, before this next bit comes off, a whole lot of work happens to interview people and so on. We interview the person, we shortlist our candidates, we do some interviews, we find a person we really like, think, fantastic, we're going to hire this person. Now we just need to get approval to do that. So that person's come in and said, yes, I'd love to work for you, but I want X, Y, and Z, right? So I want a Ford Ranger, not a Hilux. Maybe it's the other way around. I want a Hilux, not a Ford Ranger. I do some work for a Toyota, and also we want to. My salary is different than what you advertise. I'd like to negotiate a little bit higher, please. And can you relocate me, because I'm currently living in, I don't know, Hokitika, and I want to move to Christchurch for this role. So we fill in a form where we have all these extra things on there, and we then send it through an approval process. So it goes and gets approval. So is this within budget? The general manager can approve it. If it's outside that, then a conversation happens with the CEO, which I haven't shown on here. But essentially, there's an approval and a financial delegation involved. We then, once that is approved, we then start the process of making it all happen. So we notify HR, payroll and fleet. HR writes up a letter, the offer letter, and that gets sent off to the person. But at the same time, we've already notified payroll and fleet. And the reason why we've notified fleet is that they might need to organise a vehicle. And the more notice they have, the better. So we wanted to give them as much time as possible. So what we decided was that in this process, we could start the process even if the person hadn't signed the contract, because often a person signs a contract on the day they arrive at the office for the first day. They accept the offer verbally but don't sign. So that didn't give us enough time. So we decided we'd front foot it and start earlier so that we had time. And if the person didn't start for some reason, then we'll accept that risk. So that was something that we needed the business to say, we can do this. We also provisioned a user account. This involves sending a support ticket to an IT service provider, which incurs a cost of, 15 minutes at what a good IT support company's rate is $300 an hour. $180 an hour, whatever it is that they charge. So maybe it's a $45 cost. Funny thing is, small costs get managed much better in most organisations than big costs. So the microscope went on this thing, this $45 support ticket cost. We had the CFO over it, we had all of the several senior leaders in the company all over this cost, but nobody is worrying about the really big cost, which I'll tell you about later. So think about that cost. That all the effort was made to solve this, to minimise the number of times we logged a support ticket. Once we signed the support contract, signed the employment contract, we then identify the spelling mistake in the person's name. We send it back to the IT guys. The IT guys, or girls, have to then change the email address, change the display name and the user account, all those kinds of things. So we had this horrible little thing happening consistently that we were spending all our time focusing on and not focusing on the big picture, which was a bit of a problem, which led to this update a person process. So this is where we want to change person's name because their spelling's wrong. They've got married, got divorced. There's some other change. Maybe their role has changed. Perhaps we also use this one here when they changed the job title. We actually found that job titles were incorrect job titles were a thing as well. We go back to a process where it's approved. We notify the people that need to know, and then we do the updates as we go. So maybe fleet needs to be changed because the vehicle, the role's changed and now the role has a vehicle, whereas before it didn't. So what seems like a really simple process at the beginning starts to become quite complex. I did that one there twice, sorry. So success, our job is done. So on the 31st of July, I think it was the 31st of July, we went live and we were really happy. Woohoo, we've got there. Our project manager was bouncing off the walls because we've done a fantastic job. And then people started filling forms in and we started getting some problems almost immediately. That probably wasn't the facial expression we had. What actually happened was I would get text messages from our project manager with just a crying emoji. And it would just be that, nothing else, no explanation, just a crying emoji. And that was my cue on the way to work in the morning that the first thing I should do is look at my email, and there'd be an email from her with the detail of why she had the cry emoji. We had lots of things. People were not happy with the process. And the more we dug into it, the more we figured out this wasn't a technology problem. It was a people problem. We had in-flight recruitment processes. So that's where they've advertised the role and started doing the interviews. And then some of them started the process on paper because they actually did have a paper form for this, but then they decided that it would be good to finish it digitally because we had two separate forms. They would fill in the second part. The problem was the person that's on the receiving end of that needed some information from the first one, and that wasn't available to them. So we started getting all of these problems. So it was a temporary problem though, because these in-flight recruitment activities are like 4 to 6 weeks typically. So, but once we identified that, we then had to go back and communicate, this is why this is happening. And we kind of got ourselves a bit on the back foot through this process. We had people saying, why haven't I been notified of the earlier approval? Well, but they had been, but it was a paper approval, not a digital one. We had people with focused inbox in Outlook and the approval notifications going to the focused inbox. We had a really classic one, which actually it was a real head scratcher, where a general manager hadn't received the approval notification. And it wasn't until quite a while into trying to diagnose it, but we realised that because I didn't know the people in the organisation, that they were backwards. They had, the first approver had not approved. He was the person that was complaining that he hadn't received the final notification, but what he hadn't done was actually approved the thing which was going to go to the second approver for the because we had a sequential two-step approver. And so when we found that, because the problem was these guys were in their utes driving up to Blenheim, and it was an urgent thing for approving this hire. And the problem was we couldn't get hold of him, and he hadn't actually done his part of the job. He was complaining that he was the person that hadn't done it. So those kinds of things started becoming kind of variations of those started happening. Now, there were some technical problems too. We definitely made some mistakes with how we'd done a couple of things. There were some issues with some workflows that we hadn't been able to identify during testing because testing was quite complex. But there was but more than half of the problems were people problems and not technology problems, which was both a blessing and a curse. And then we had the classic bypass the process. We actually had someone walk up to the CEO and say, I want to hire this person. And the CEO, who should know better, said, okay. And so they went off and did it. No paperwork. Right, this is 2 months into the digital process at this point. So this is the sort of stuff that happens. Because the guy was in the office and saw him in the hallway, he took that as an approval. The CEO didn't think he'd approved. He thought, I'm going to get an electronic form for that later, and I'll fill it in. The other guy went and offered a job to someone. Awesome, eh? So that's the sort of stuff that happens in the real world. So the big lesson that we got out of this really was that the people that we thought understood this process the most may have actually understood it the least or had different understandings of the process. So what we did was we got everyone together in the room, in the boardroom. We actually got all of the hiring managers that we could possibly find, plus all of the senior leadership team. So it's a big meeting, got them all together, and we said, we're going to take you through this process end to end, and we're going to role play a recruitment activity. That was the best thing we could have done. Because it got all of the, oh, but I do this, and oh, I thought it was that questions out of the way, because we had the HR team there as well. They were able to actually answer some of these questions. Excuse me. So the really important thing was going slowly end to end, but actually role playing out rather than just saying this is the process. We actually said, right, we're going to hire an engineer. The engineer, this is how the whole process goes. That was good. And in the end, probably the thing that led to the final success. So we started getting the hang of it, and we could tell this by the tone of the questions that we were getting. I'm not going to use the language that was used because these guys wear fibers and steel cap boots, and so you could probably imagine what some of the language was like, not office appropriate. But that was the sort of stuff we were getting at the start. I wouldn't classify it necessarily as a question, as a statement. And we were getting a few of those. But the tone started changing. And we could tell we were starting to win because the tone started going. I was getting less cry emojis. A week went by with no cry emoji text from the project manager, and she rang me to tell me it's been a whole week. We haven't had a cry emoji this week. That's really good. I'm very happy. We started noticing people phoning a friend, really going, asking the other person for help rather than giving up or complaining or whatever. They were actually starting to self-help. So these are good signs that user adoption is starting to improve. And we could see this happening through. And we started to see the benefits starting to shine through. So some of the benefits that started, I'm going to talk about them a little bit later, but some of those benefits started to come through, and we started seeing improvement. And we started seeing some of those old habits die out, not completely, but they did start to die. Excuse me. So the improvements, we then decided that we'd start making improvements. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this was an iterative process. And what we wanted to do was get something up and going, because it was actually really difficult to get everybody on the same page. So the commitment we made at the start was, we'll go live with version 1, which will be good enough. And then we will commit time to making improvements to the process. And the first mistake we did was start to get very knee-jerk reactionary. We would make minor changes. So because the person asking for those changes was important. So we had the CFO ask us, for example, to make a small change. We made the change that she wanted. That stopped something happening that was important for the HR manager. Right, so a minor change to an email notification. It was very minor. It had a whole chain reaction. So we had a couple of false starts where we made those kinds of mistakes, and we had to sort them out very quickly. And it's very reactive. And as a project team, the worst thing that you can be is reactive. You want to be planned and working through, because we had other follow-on work happening with the same people delivering that work. And when you get reactive, you can't focus on the stuff you're supposed to be focusing on. So we agreed that we would stop making changes. We would batch them up. We would get our BA to go back and confirm what needed to be done. And we work with all of the stakeholders in the flow, not just the individual that was being allowed voice. Batching those projects together, those changes together, meant we were able to size them as a team, because some of them are actually outside our scope of work. So we're able to size those up, put a plan around it, including change management, actually doing the work and getting it into live. And we were able to communicate when it was going to happen. And by slowing the business down, because they were like, we want this now, by slowing them down, the first week, they weren't very happy. The second week, when we started delivering stuff, they were much happier. Because this organisation also, as I said, we're really good project managers externally, but when you're doing they're in construction, you're constructing something massive, it's not like doing an IT project. They weren't used to agile. They weren't used to, they just thought, oh, this stuff's easy to do, you guys can just do that. Well, it's not always easy. So we spent a lot of time on that. And then the other thing that we did that I think was really critically important was doing end-to-end testing with the business process owners involved, sitting actually watching us do it. They were hands-off, letting us do the testing, and then we go, yes, tested, and they weren't very engaged with it. As soon as we started trying to engage them more in testing was very important. And then finally monitoring after we'd gone live. So once we'd actually made the changes and gone live, monitoring the process, because weird things happen. Unexpected things happened. We learned quite a few lessons. Here's a few. Start dates are not exact. We had a form that required you to enter, the hiring manager to enter in the start date for a person. The process depended on that start date, but people don't start on the date that they think they're going to start on for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes they need to relocate their family because they were moving between cities. Sometimes there's other things that happen that prevent them starting on that particular date. Sometimes it's just not known because I've got to finish off the contract. And we were asking that date too early in the process, and it was compulsory. Yeah, it was compulsory because the HR team wanted to have a date on the form. We made it compulsory. Guess what? People made guesses, and those guesses were wrong. Because at that point we hadn't signed the contract. So what we did was, instead of trying to allow people to enter an exact date, we just we made it clear to the people in the process, this date is our expected start date, not our actual start date. Because payroll, we're doing things like setting up the payroll to start calculating from that day. We're saying, no, payroll, you're not going to do that. You're not going to use that date for that. You're going to use the date on the contract. Additional benefits require different people to provision those benefits, and they had very different timeframes. So utes, phones, devices, laptops, and so on, user accounts, ordering safety equipment for the person. All of those things all take different times, and you can't. So rather than having them in the workflow, we just sent a notification out, and then our assumption was, once that notification was received by the person that had that task, that they would manage it from that point forward. It was too difficult to try and manage that in a process in the time we had. They also need to determine whether they're ordering new gear or existing gear. And we had a few things like laptops being ordered when they already had one that was going to be handed over. Guess what? If you order a ute that's not needed, the cost of that ute is more than the budget for our project. So if we could stop that happening, that's a big win, right? So that's a good one. And finally, not everybody that's offered a job says yes. So we do have people that say that we also have though people that say yes and then don't turn up. So they say yes, they get an employment contract, and then they just never show up for the job. That's actually something that happens in this particular scenario. I know none of us would do that, but that's definitely a thing in the construction industry. Sometimes they've got two offers and they just go, I'm just going to go get another job. or it's too hard, I don't want to do it. They just don't show up. And so you never end up with a signed version of the contract, even though it's been sent out, and everything's been verbally agreed, it never gets signed. I'm going to show you how this form, as you can see, is highly sophisticated. We've spent an awfully large amount of time designing this form. No, this is version 1. The idea was we want to whack this form out as quickly as possible to prove the process, because they had so many things that they couldn't agree on. We wanted to show them the process. So we did a very low effort initial form. We embedded an intranet page, and then we tested and validated and improved. We decided that that was the best approach to take, because essentially they really didn't quite know what they want. Even when the BA went away and documented their requirements and then got them to sign off on the requirements and then showed them, go, oh no, that's not what we want, right? So the BA's job was hard because they weren't mature enough as a business to understand what it was we're even agreeing to at this point. So we decided, let's save them the pain of an expensive mistake and just start lo-fi and build up. This form is so easy, I could create it with a little bit of help from Ash. Thanks, Ash. We had some technical challenges. We had processes that went outside the organisation. So their IT, they have no IT manager. So 400 staff, but none in IT, right? All IT was outsourced. So we would have to send an email to log a ticket to set up a new user account. What we wanted to do was we wanted to link that IT ticket back to the job, to our SharePoint. We had a job list in SharePoint. We wanted to link that job back. So we did a little workflow to monitor a mailbox and do that, which I'll show you shortly. We had people rejecting approvals for trivial things. And the problem was we were using Microsoft Forms for some of this stuff. And what does that mean? Somebody's got to go back, fill in this form. And this form, it wasn't short. It had things like list all the software you wanted. So I've got an engineer. That software needs some CAD software. They need some specialist design things, and so on. If you missed one thing off that list, it got rejected by the CFO, who thought he was the controller of all things. And then you had to go right back to the start of the process. So that was not great. So we redesigned the process and changed it so that she could make those minor updates and not have to cause a whole lot of additional work. And we allowed them to add additional details to the requests. So let's talk about some of our processes. So the external process here, we would send an email to our managed service provider for setting up a user account. They would receive an email. We would they would respond with an email. So that's an automatically generated email with a ticket number in the subject line. We would take the ticket number from the subject line of the email and stick it against the corresponding request in the SharePoint list. And then if we were doing any updates, we would reply back with our workflow using the same ticket reference. So that it was all on a single ticket reference for that job. And then the job would be, and then we had an agreement about when the job could be closed off. That was cool. We would have things like rejection. So we'd have the hiring manager forgetting to put something on the form. The manager would approve, the general manager would see something, or the CFO, whoever it was, somebody else in the chain would see it. They would cancel it, and then the hiring manager would have to start the process from the beginning again. Not ideal. So we improved that process. We allowed the hiring manager to forget something on the form. The manager could update the request, and then everybody was happy at the end of that process. We just had to remember in the workflow that if you're generating a variable to hold the template email messages and so on, that you would need to read the item to be able to get the data back. So I'm sure that most of us know that that's a problem and how to do it. This is just a quick view. I thought I'd better include at least a screenshot of something in Power Automate for this talk today. So this is it. So this one here is a little workflow which sits there and monitors a mailbox. When we sent the email out to the mailbox, we would then out to the supplier, IT company. They would reply to this mailbox. We would compose we read the subject line of the email message. What we did on the outbound email was we put the item ID for the SharePoint list item into the subject line, and then with a little hashtag, so we could parse it back out of the subject line. I've got a video on my blog on how to do that if anybody's interested. It's quite a simple little email, but it means you can connect up those, flow, but it lets you connect up the emails, and then we just update the list item with the ticket number, and then we sent the email on to the internally back to the to a group internally to say, here's the ticket number request. There was a little peculiarity we found with the ticketing system we were interacting with, which was that if you emailed to it and CC'd several other emails, it would reply back just to the sender. So we had this problem where we couldn't close the loop. So we just did that by just forwarding the email on at the end. So that was a simple solution to the problem. We had some challenges around deploying updates. So just a few things to think about. Updating forms and work meant that sometimes they also had to update the workflows. It meant handling different fields or different field options sometimes. That meant that if you had stuff which had happened before and you're kind of rerun on that item, maybe the data's missing. We needed to consider the in-flight processes themselves. So what's the experience going to be for a person that started on version 1 of this flow versus version 2? So that meant easiest option, change management and communication. So lots of communicating about these changes and what to expect. And I put etc. on there because there's like a myriad of other little things you've got to think about. But the big ones really are when you're making a change to the form, it's going to impact the workflow, and then there's stuff that's already happening that you need to think about. I'm just checking my time. Success. So what does success look like for this project? So in the first 3 months of going live, we had recruited 70 roles through this process. So you can see they're quite a fast-growing organisation. They're spinning up 2 new divisions at the time, so 70 roles hired. Requests were being actioned much faster because what used to happen was the CEO, his comment was, I used to be able to do this stuff quickly, but now I'm having to go to all of these different cities and the paper's in my office. So now he can approve it on his phone. One little trick we did was we included all the email information that the CEO needed in the email. We didn't use an approval because he wasn't just digitally sophisticated in the nicest possible way. We didn't use an approval. Like we would include in the email, all the detail needed, and we would let him reply. He was the last step in the change. We'd let him reply, but he's better now. He's using approvals now. We didn't want to upset him. We identified a really significant cost-saving opportunity, and that was because the process became visible. And we identified that when someone was hiring somebody through a recruitment agency, they were paying a recruitment fee of about 15% of the salary on the hire. And that was outside their financial delegation. When you're hiring site engineers and project engineers for large construction projects, they have quite big salaries. This was bypassing the financial delegation. It became visible because the CEO could see the amount going through, and the result of that was being able to go and say, can we get a better deal with our recruiters, or should we even be using a recruitment agency for those roles anyway? So they saved, I would say, tens of thousands of dollars just through that one simple email notification and making that part of the process visible. And when you multiply that across 70 roles, it's potentially quite an enormous amount of money. The fewer account set up mistakes. So we're actually, when we tuned the process more, which involved working with the IT help desk team and getting them to change their process slightly as well, we asked them to tailor it for us. At first they were reluctant to, but once they realised the benefit of it, they did. Less account setup mistakes, and the accounts are set up in advance and early. We did have an unexpected problem though, which was because the process was so efficient, people started showing up in the staff directory before they'd signed their contract. So we just changed the project to make the process so that when the account's set up, they are hidden in the address book by default, and then enable them once they start. But they were showing up in the internet directories and all over the show, Outlook and so on. And there was much more control over the hiring process in general. So now everybody was actually, we had a controlled process, which is much more visible to people. What would we do differently? A few things. I think we would spend more time up front mapping the processes, but I think we would do it in a different way. Our business analysts went and talked to individuals, mapped their parts of the process out, stitched it all together, and then thought that we had the whole process understood. We didn't. I think we would get everyone in the room more, and we would do that part again, where we're going through the process almost exhaustively to make sure that everybody's happy with it and understands what they're signing off on. I would make it easier for process owners to solve their own issues. So a lot of the issues around knowing when something started. So if we had in our list made it very clear that this item started on stage 2 of the process because it's new, that would have solved a lot of the early on issues. A temporary thing, but I think if we did that, I think it would be better. We'd increase the amount of training and user adoption effort. Our training sessions at the beginning were too small, not enough. And this is really a process change for the organisation. And I think we'd slow down a little. We felt as a project team under pressure to deliver on a date. The date and the pressure was coming from the senior leadership team and our project sponsor. I think in hindsight, if we had waited one more week, they would have got a better initial result because we've had more time to train people. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. I've got some time for questions, I think. A few minutes for questions. If you do want to find me, there's my blog, my email address, my Twitter handle, or X, and LinkedIn. So feel free to ping me on any of those. Has anybody got any questions or points I'd like to discuss? All right.
You said they were a fast-growing company, and I can imagine that trying to implement a new process, digitalize a process like this in a fast-growing company, that the positions of, I'm not sure what the time frame was, but yeah, were there actually stakeholders and people who were involved in the process that actually moved on? And
we were quite, I think we were quite lucky. The senior leadership team of the core team that were doing most of the hiring initially was solid. There were no changes in that team. However, what I would say was it wasn't always clear on whose role was what. So it wasn't clear to us as a project team because they didn't really have a traditional organisation structure. Active Directory was a bit of a mess, and we had a tidy up activity happening at the same time. So we couldn't go and automatically find the line managers or the GM for that person worked for. It wasn't clear because we had functions in the organisation that actually had multiple reported to more than one general manager, and so we resolved that by just putting in a people picker field and getting the person to actually select the person manually because we couldn't automate it any other way, and that was good enough. I think if we had changes in those hiring manager positions, they probably would have actually benefited from not having the bad habits of the past because there were a lot of bad habits that we had to break through this process. Yeah.
But just to get an idea of the size of the project from your side, how many people were working on it often?
So this was part of a larger program of work which included Microsoft 365 implementation and an intranet development. So from our team, we had 3 of us working not full-time on the project, but probably 1 FTE equivalent over 3 months across intranet and workflows and forms and so on process. Of this piece of work here, I think it was roughly 80 hours of actual implementation, but that would exclude the BA who was not part of our team. So the BA was an independent contractor that was full-time contracted, and I suspect that she was spending maybe through this part, perhaps a day and a half a week for about 6 to 8 weeks to document, process, and deal with issues and get approval and so on. There was quite a lot of stuff to get out of people's heads. Yeah, so it's quite challenging, I think. Yeah. So we were trying to do it within a small budget because the lifetime of the project was small, which is why we made some of the choices we made about how we approached it. Yeah. And we also had a content creator. We were lucky we had a fantastic content creator who wrote all of our training guides and made some videos and all that kind of stuff for us. My advice, get a young, enthusiastic graduate who's got a thirst for learning and give them those jobs, because she did a fantastic job producing all of the training material and so on, and sitting down with people and coaching and so on. So that was additional to what this as well. But yeah, just because we had supporting documents on the intranet around process and policy and things as well. And then the final thing is like, Ash and Divya over here from my team, they both got involved in various stages along the project and some of the workflows, and it was very helpful having people that could respond quickly, because we were focused on delivering those pieces. So it's quite important about the supporting after the initial go live, because we knew there were going to be things that needed to change, but having that team approach was good from that point of view. Well, thank you very much for your time, and also thank you very much to our sponsors. So these events don't happen without great sponsorship, and so DXC, Expert Logics, Microsoft, and Fusion 5, thank you very much for your time, and also thank you very much to Rich for organising. It's been great. Thank you, Rich. Thank you.
Steve's also talking at the Digital Workplace Conference in February, which is in Christchurch. So if anyone doesn't know about that, we should tell other people.
We should.
And there's a meetup next month as well for Office 365.
Yes, there is. There's Office 365 meetup on the 5th of December. And that will be at Stratus offices. And the 27th and 28th of February is the Digital Workplace Conference. There are 18 Power Platform talks and a whole bunch of talks on all things Microsoft 365 there with speakers from around the world. And it's at Tapai. So a great conference if you haven't been. I'm talking about Microsoft 365 Copilot for Office. And if anybody's interested in seeing that, I do actually have a copy of it.
Already made the slides already.
I've already made the slides, yeah. So, thank you very much.